People who were in a coma, what were you shocked by when you woke up? In the 90s, my great-grandfather had a stroke. He spent 3 weeks in a coma, and when he woke up, he forgot how to speak English. He could only speak Choctaw. He learned it when he was a child because his family lived near a Choctaw reservation, and he played with many local kids. At that time, he spoke the language fluently, but forgot it over his lifetime. And by this time, he couldn't remember a single word. This lasted for about 10 days, and then he woke up from a nightmare and suddenly could only speak English again, without remembering a single Choctaw word. He could also repeat verbatim every conversation that took place in the room while he was in a coma. Wow. Brains are an amazing thing. If I'm not mistaken, there's a guy who, after a coma, started speaking Cantonese and eventually hooked up with a Chinese girl. I was in a coma for 4 days. When I woke up, everyone around was talking about some baby of mine. I lost my long-term memory and didn't even remember being pregnant. My son was in the children's hospital in the neonatal intensive care unit. I gave birth to him by cesarean section at 29 weeks. It was all related to Crohn's disease. I found out about it after I woke up. During pregnancy, my large intestine ruptured. My husband said I talked like a child when I first came to. When I woke up, I felt very tired, and in the next few days, I was still a little anxious. I remembered one conversation my mom had with a nurse while I was unconscious. A couple of days later, my long-term memory returned, and I remembered everything up to my second surgery. My son was born only during the third surgery. Edited. In general, my son was what surprised me. Is your son okay? Yes, he weighed 1 kilogram, 474 grams, and now he is 18 years old and 195 centimeters tall. Thanks for asking. I was in a coma for 9 days. When I woke up, I was still on a ventilator. When they disconnected me, my body didn't remember how to breathe on its own. I literally had to learn how to do it again. It took me a few days. I didn't have a natural sense of how long or deep to inhale, how long to hold my breath, and how long to exhale. I had to direct all my concentration to breathing. It was really scary. Edited. For everyone who was interested in how I slept. I didn't sleep the first few days. If I dozed off, my oxygen sensor would start beeping and wake me up, and then the nurse would yell at me across the ICU not to forget to breathe. I couldn't speak because I had tubes in my nose and throat, but I remember waking up to that damn beeping once, very tired. In general, I started concentrating on breathing again, but it really pissed me off. My nurse would run over and yell at me to breathe. I looked at her and shouted with my absent voice, "Yes, I'm breathing." She must have read my lips and felt the resentment because she just raised her hands and said, okay, good job, and then left. In general, I shared this because I've never had the opportunity before. My ability to breathe normally returned to me in a month or so. I'm fine with my health now, so I wouldn't say it affected me permanently. Well, thanks. Now I'm watching every breath I take. Don't forget to blink. Asshole, you ruined the next 30 minutes of my life. My mom was in an induced coma for 3 months. When she woke up, she thought the hospital was trying to kill her. She tried to get out of bed and one fell on the floor because she couldn't walk. Mostly she was scared that her legs had lost their shape. She had to relearn how to control every muscle. She couldn't speak properly at all and forgot how to write. After relearning, she had a different handwriting. She said she hated how perfect her hands looked. Her nails and cuticles were perfect and clean from not being used at all. I remember trying to brush her hair after she woke up. Almost all of it had fallen out. She nearly died every day while she was in a coma. She developed sepsis after diverticulitis following a failed surgery. Most of her hair grew back and she was able to walk, but she has brain damage that makes her seem very drunk. She's always dizzy, but it's been 5 years now, and her recovery can be called a miracle. A good friend of our family fell into a coma for 6 months. Eventually, when he came to, he was shocked to see how old his wife looked. In fact, he lost the last 15 years of his memory. He knew he had 2 children, but they were babies, and he didn't even know about his 3rd child. The memory never came back. He jumped from the absence of cell phones to smartphones and laptops. Everything was new to him. Being stuck in the early 90s, but actually being in the 2000s, he had a lot to learn. But finding out that you missed your children growing up was the hardest for him. This is the saddest story I've seen in this thread. Oh my god, this is awful. He must have felt like it was a punishment for something terrible. My wife was in an induced coma for 2 weeks for medical reasons. When she woke up, she had false memories. They were all based on conversations that took place in her room. For example, she thought they had flown to Washington for treatment. While she was in a coma, my father was telling how he had just returned from a business trip to Washington. Somehow, she overheard this while unconscious, and her brain interpreted it as if she had flown to Washington. Even after we explained to her the reality of where she was, it took days for her to come to terms with reality. My brother-in-law had a brain tumor, so he was unconscious for a while when he was first taken to the hospital. The nurses were of Asian descent, so when he woke up, he apologized to the people for making them come to Japan to see him. My stepfather was in a coma for about 3 weeks. When he woke up, he couldn't find his teeth. We completely forgot where we put them and searched for a whole week. At one point, he dropped dead by the hospital sink, out of nowhere. He was resuscitated, but they couldn't figure out why he could barely breathe. Then the doctors sat us down and showed x-rays with his dentures inside. They forgot to take them out when they inserted the tubes into his mouth, which led to an airway blockage or something like that. So yeah, we found them. I was in a coma for 4 days from bacterial meningitis. When I woke up, I was completely deaf. I had to communicate with my parents and doctors using a notepad and pen. Somehow, my hearing gradually returned in my left ear, but my right ear is still 100% deaf to this day. Yo! Someone else who had bacterial meningitis. I'm so glad you survived. Believe me, it could have been much worse. Thanks, man. I'm glad I made it too. The doctors gave me a 10% chance of survival. Glad you made it too. Edited. Talked to my mother. She said the doctors only gave me a 5% chance that I would survive. Holy shit. My wife was in a medically induced coma for 4 days. She had a reaction to the contrast dye and her heart stopped for 20 minutes. For almost 3 months, she communicated with her long-deceased parents. She talked about them as if they were in the next room. Or she would say that her daughter or brother called her. But they didn't call. She constantly believed that her mother and father were alive. It drove me crazy when I had to gently correct her many times a day. She made up amazing stories about what people, relatives, friends, neighbors were doing, what they were saying. Really creative fiction. After 3 months, she began to come to her senses. The confabulation stopped. Everything changed. She can remember recent events, but her long-term memories are gone. I don't know what it's like, but it must be terrible. Sometimes she cries for her lost memories, but overall, she's doing very well. My father had a reaction to the contrast dye after a head injury. He had seizures and it was like a brain reboot. He could only say, "How's the girl?" My sister had just been born. He couldn't hold or grab things. He spent several months in therapy. Eventually his mood changed. He became very irritable, a little impatient, and very sleepy. He's fine now except for some neck pain. About 20 years ago, my cousin suffered a serious head injury after a fall. He was about 20 years old at the time. He was in a coma for almost 4 weeks. When he woke up, and he pretty quickly discovered that he had eidetic memory. He could retell any conversation word for word and even tell you the date and time you said something. In addition, he could memorize images in just a few seconds. His memory is still eidetic. It's damn annoying. Whenever he reminds me of something I said in the past, usually something I can't even remember, I suggest hitting him on the head again. Looking at what happened last time he got hit in the head, probably just get another superpower. Better not risk trying to fix him. Nah, he's just malfunctioning. You need to turn him off and on again. DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis, sent me into a coma. I have vague memories of being sick. The overall sense of time was just like mush. Even years later, I can't establish a proper timeline. I have flashes of memories of different doctors coming in and out of the room. Once I came out of the coma, I was still out of it. When you're on an insulin drip, doctors check your sugar every hour. I could never fall asleep, but I felt asleep the whole time. It's hard to describe the feeling, just mushy, dragging time. I was in a coma for almost 6 weeks. When I woke up, I had to learn everything again. I retained most of my speech abilities, but my motor skills were terrible. I had to learn how to wipe my ass, as well as how to go up and down stairs. It took about 3 weeks. I also lost a ton of weight. I was 190 centimeters tall and weighed about 65 kilograms. 6 weeks? Jesus Christ. Severe head injury, after which I had an MRI with dye that I was severely allergic to. I died on the table in a few minutes. My nephew, 14 years old, was in a medically induced coma for over 3 months. During this time, he lost about 30% of his body weight as his muscles atrophied. His first remark when he saw himself was, "Did you forget to feed me?" It was incredibly hard to hear as his family sat and sobbed by his bedside the entire time he was unconscious. I was in a coma for 3 weeks, from September 2nd to 26th, 2001. I was driving through Pennsylvania on my way to Ithaca to meet with the marketing manager of the company I was working for at the time. I embarked on this trip on September 2nd, 2001, and I don't remember much of what happened except for what the medics and hospital staff told me. But the gist of it is that I was hit or run off the road by a drunk driver trying to cross 3 lanes to get to the exit I was on. Basically, I ended up in his blind spot at the wrong time. In addition to him being drunk as a skunk, almost everyone here can guess what happened on September 11th, 2001. It felt like I was teleported or time traveled because 1 minute I'm driving and the next I'm smashed up and bloody. I'm on a hospital bed with a brace on my back and neck, burns from the airbag gas, an IV in my arm, and a few other minor injuries. When I woke up, I was in a completely different world than the one I left. Before I fell asleep, the economy was fine. The world was pretty cool overall. And then I woke up. Chaos. That's all there was. Thank you so much for watching. In the comments, you can write if you were in a coma, what shocked you when you woke up. Plus, don't forget to check out other videos from our channel.